how's everybody doing today? My name is Jaden, and we are going to be talking about modern learning. And what modern learning is me explaining the modern shift, the society shift in the 2010s and how that impacts us today. Okay, so a quick recap of the last lecture is probably not posted, but a quick run through, right? In the 2010s, okay, we see a rise of the Internet of Things, right? Devices are now in our pockets, readily accessible. Internet is widespread throughout every country in the world. And so we have a rise of the Internet of Things. And with the rise of that, we have a rise of global communication. So we can communicate between each other at a given notice. And what I'm saying is, with the rise of Internet of Things and global communications in the 2010s, we now have an abundance of data, okay? Every time you leave something on a forum, every time you interact with someone overseas, wait a few weeks, come back to it, and it's still there, that data is fundamentally stored somewhere that you can't physically see, but you just know that it's there. That's why you're able to interact with it and come back and save your work. So that's why we have the rise of data. Okay? And here's where it turns, okay? Because with the rise of data, especially with this layer, right? Internet of Things to global communication, all of that being stored in a database, we are now able to train AI at scale. So you can see how rise of Internet of Things, global communication leads to us storing data, which allows us to train that data with AI. So that is the central thesis, the central point of everything that I'm making, okay? Just understanding how this works. So today, I'm going to be talking about how this works on a smaller scale, an individual scale, on a much more personal scale. So the first things we need to know is that there are three pillars in terms of how we interact with data and how our modern society is structured, right? So number one is the emotional and psychological layer. Okay? And this is important because with this data and with this data age in our modern society, it's not about how we understand what we know and how we get information. It's also about how we feel about this information on a daily, day-to-day basis, okay? So a lot of these social apps, social media apps, sites, etc., are designed to keep your attention. And to go a step even further, they're designed to trigger your emotions, right? And so you think about it, likes, certain notifications, breaking news alerts, whatever, et cetera, these aren't accidental. They're designed to create a feedback loop for you to feel a type of way and interact with the content. So that's something that we should understand and acknowledge when we are interacting online, okay? And with this, right? And with how this is set up, okay, we can understand that this fundamentally is a new economy in and of itself, all right? And this economy is based solely off of attention, right? How can we compete against other social media platforms, other apps, other sites, et cetera, for your individual attention? And the only way to do that is to play on your emotions and your psychology as much as possible. So that is something that you really want to understand when interacting, okay? And an example of this is emotional outsourcing, okay? emotional outsourcing. And what this is, right, an example. If you were to say you're in a new city and you want to look for a new restaurant, what are you going to do? You're probably going to look on your phone and see, hey, what are some good restaurants nearby near me? But if you see a restaurant that has a 2.8 rating versus a 3.5 rating, which one are you going to choose? Right? You're obviously going to choose the 3.5 one based on that data that was given to you, because it makes you feel more secure in this option. Is that the better restaurant? Is it the better choice? There's no way to truly tell, but based off of the data that you're given, you're thinking, hey, 2.8, that's pretty low. I don't want to go there. I'm not going to consider that. I'd rather consider 3.5 because it makes me feel more secure in my choice and I feel better about going there. And this is interesting. It really is, because we increasingly look at data for recommendations, just about our decisions in our average life, rather than trusting our own judgment. You might have heard something from a friend like, hey, this restaurant was pretty good, but you look online and you see, hey, I don't really see a lot of good reviews on it. I'm going to skip. It overrides your own judgment. All right. And another example is the comparison trap, right? So, and this is on the psych layer. So comparison. And the thing about this is your social data, that's all available to be viewed, right? Your followers, your like count, whatever, highlight reels, like everything that you look at online is playing on your psychology. Because you might look at somebody that is online that has an abundance of likes, an abundance of media attention, online media attention, and you might feel, hey, why don't I have that attention? Why am I not at this place? Why am I not taking these photos, et cetera, doing this type of thing? And that plays on our psychology on a deep level, because we're now measuring our worth compared to others. All right? And so that directly leads me into the second point, which is spirituality, right? How we are connected spiritually as well as relationally. So, see if you can see that. Spirit / relation. Okay? And this is something else that was been impacted in the 2010s forward with the rise of Internet of Things, rise of global communication and data, et cetera, because now we are in a paradox. And that paradox is essentially, even though we are globally connected by the data and by our infrastructure than any point in history, loneliness as well as disconnect and spiritual emptiness is at an all-time low. So the question is, how are we connected globally but still not connected with each other relationally? You get what I'm saying? And there's a few key points to this. And it's actually, the question isn't whether we are connected or not, it's more so, what are we actually connected to? All right? So with this, the main thing that we are connected to, right, is bandwidth without depth. Okay, so no depth. And a really good point with this is we can reach anyone at any time. We can talk to our friends, we can like and interact with them socially, online, etc., do all of that. But when a real problem emerges, we don't really have anyone that we can necessarily talk to other than maybe one or two people, right? So that is no depth. And you see rise of that in this era, in this generation, which all stems from the 2010s Internet of Things, global connected to data that we are now a part of right now. So no depth is a good one, as well as spirituality in the data age. Okay, because this is another good one, because instead of us going to a church where we are locally all in the same place, looking for the same spirituality, the same mission, the same divine entity, we're not getting that. And what are people turning to? Well, they're turning to more podcast influencers and virtual, rather than practicing spirituality and connectedness in the community. So this also is on no depth, and I'd say it is spirituality online. Spirit online. Okay? And you see a lot of this now, and it's, podcasts, it's influencers, things like that, that are, a lot of people in our generation are basing their identity off of. And I say our generation, I'm Gen Z, but this is across the board. More people are turning away from their local community church to go into spirituality online, okay? And that is what is going on. All right, and so the next key point is the algorithm as an oracle, okay? So to quickly understand what an algorithm is, right? Say you open Instagram, say you open TikTok or something like that, and it offers you, hey, can we track across your other devices, across your current device, what you've been doing, so we can tailor ads to you or do whatever. But if you actually look in those terms of service, they're also tailoring your specific algorithm towards you, what you interact with, what you don't interact with, what plays on your emotions, your comparisons, and what doesn't. And with that being said, your algorithm is essentially becoming an oracle to predict how you will behave, how you interact with certain things, as well as what you believe in, right? So people, and this is also worth noting, okay? Because people will unconsciously treat recommendations as guides for what to watch, what to think, what to behave, and what values to have. Despite that, it's a spiritual function that is only made for determining what you like and how we can play on your emotion, as well as psychology. All right, so that is something that you want to look at, especially when you're scrolling through social media or online in general. And that is something that we should look at. An example of this, right? Maybe you see something online, or maybe you see a case, a random court case or something, and you think, hey, this is necessarily wrong, I don't believe in this, but you get online, and then everyone is saying, hey, we need to think this certain way, so it becomes essentially you are now taking your social media algorithm, what the people that you know and respect are already pushing their opinion on, and then you make it your opinion, And and the problem with this is it has no depth, because it's only trained to play on your psychology and emotion. So there is actually no depth behind a lot of what you see online and a lot of what you see on social media. And that's important. And we can tie this in a little further, okay? Because spirituality and relations, right? It's changing us from having authentic resonance to us being in a simulation almost. And all of these things, three things embody this, because without depth, we're not truly connected in any way, And the example I made before is a really good one. I'm going to say it again, and that is whenever you see if something happened to you personally, right? And it might have upset you. You're not going to go online and talk to people about it. You're not going to swipe up on whoever or message whoever views your story to talk to them about your personal problems, you're not, because there's no depth to online interactions. The more depth you get is when you're close interacting face to face with people who you really trust. That's why most people only have one or two friends that they're really comfortable sharing a lot of important and confidential information with. So that's something that is really good to look at. So that is the spiritual and relation layer. So now let's move forward and we will talk about how we view things. And this is another really good layer. Okay? So this is actually the material layer, right? And here, I'm actually going to use black with this. And then I'll use green to emphasize my point with material. So think about material, right? What do you think of whenever I say material? Okay? And how we view it. And I want you to think about this pre-2010s versus where we are today. So back then, you could see, back then, say it's 2006. Somebody's walking around with a flip phone and, hey, what's going on? I don't want to talk to you anymore. They flip it closed. You're not going to say anything. You're going to be like, oh, that's just a normal guy taking a phone call. He didn't want it anymore. He closed the phone. The thing is, though, in today's day and age, with the rise of data, the rise of Internet of Things, global communication, right? With our algorithms pushing us towards emotions, pushing us towards to play in our psychology, impacting our spirit. We have no depth, no online spirituality that's actually is meaningful. So where does that leave us with material? And in today's day and age, if you see somebody with the flip phone, you're going to be like, wow, this guy must not be doing well for himself. He probably doesn't have that much money. He's on a flip phone. Why doesn't he have an iPhone? And that is actually something that's very key to understand, because now your device is an extension of yourself. And this concept is very, very interesting, because if you think about it today, in today's time, a lot of people consider their device, their phone, a huge extension of themselves, because they have their entire identity on there. They have all of their pictures, memories, all of their social status interactions, all of that are stored on their device. It's no longer just a tool, it's an appendage. And people actually report feeling genuine anxiety when they're separated from their device. And why is that, right? Why do they feel anxiety when they separate from their device? Well, we just talked about it, because their device is now playing on their spirit, which plays on their psychology, which plays on their emotions. And this is all from the rise of this, okay? So that's how we can look at where this is, because in today's day and age, most people are on their device an extensive amount of time. If you look at their screen, a lot of people's screen times, things like that, it's over 7-8 hours a day sometimes. And it's a real problem, because all of this gets amplified. And another example I want to make about this, okay? And the material in this point in time, right? So let's look at, take something simple, right? Designer clothing. Okay, everybody loves designer clothes. The problem with designer clothes, though, is we're not even necessarily talking about how good the clothes are quality-wise. We're now viewing them as a social status. And pre-2010s, if you see somebody walking down the street and they had a nice designer bag, or they had a nice designer shirt, designer outfit, whatever, you're probably gonna think, hey, they're doing pretty nice to themselves, for themselves. You know, they're actually pretty put on a nice. That's nice stuff. They're actually pretty. You know, it makes you feel positively towards them. But in today's day and age, it's not just the community looking at it; it's millions of people. Okay. So now, millions of people are able to see your designer clothes that you wear once you post them online. And most people are buying designer clothes to really post them online to flex social status. And why are they doing that? We're going to go back to it. So they're doing all of this, right, to flex their social status because their device is connected to their spirit, right, which is connected to their psychology and their emotions, which is from the rise of the global communication and data era. All right? So it's important to understand that. It really is. And we can actually go a little bit deeper. All right? And we could say, this. Okay? Because this is also really important to note. And that is, in today's day and age, what we have right here is quite literally culture. It's modern day culture, right? Because social media is so ingrained, online interacting is so ingrained, global communication is so ingrained in our day-to-day system. We have a rise of so much data that we can only really that we can attribute to a lot of rising problems, right? And that is where the culture comes into play. And we can go to this in a little bit more deeper detail because there's a few more examples that I like to make. The first being, okay, if you go on vacation, right? Let me ask you this. If you go on vacation, does it really count if you don't post it online? You know? Well, it matters to you necessarily, but you want to virtue signal where you are online because your device is the sense of self because what is on it, right? And so your designer clothes, this could really be any material, designer clothes, you going on trips and posting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's become culture. And why does it become culture? Because online is where we are getting our new spiritual information, you know? Because we get all our information from our algorithm that pushes us towards influencers that influence us spiritually, even though they have no depth, and we are being pushed towards emotional outsourcing, psychological comparison, all for attention, right? And again, it's from this entire loop up here. So yeah, and so think about it. You go on vacation and you post about it and you get a lot of likes and you get a lot of people interacting with it and saying, oh, that's such a cool vacation. They might repost and everything. All of that is essentially us signaling online, right? This is us communicating online. You know, we want to share our opinion online, right? The problem is, though, there is no depth to that, you know? There is no depth to that, and ask yourself, are the people that are always liking, reposting your things, always viewing your things, are they necessarily the people that you would turn to in an actual crisis? Are they somebody that you would feel comfortable with sharing certain information with? Obviously not, but since we're so tied to it, there is no way for a lot of people to distinguish and this is important. So I'm going to write it in red. Because there's no way to distinguish online from reality. And that is a lot of the fact of the matter. And the reason why is, like I said before with this, and I'm going to hammer it in and I'm going to hammer it home. The 2010s, rise of the Internet of Things, global communication leads us to data, which leads us to AI, right? And with that rise of data, we can train AI as well as algorithms to gather as much attention from you as possible through your emotional, psychological layers on these social media apps, online websites, with certain likes, notifications. All of those play on your psychology and emotion, which affect you spiritually online, and because you're also seeing no depth there. And since your algorithm is still pushing this on you, it leads you to believe that your device is an extension of yourself. Okay? Your device is an extension of yourself. So that leads you to buying designer clothes, going on a lot of trips, etc., and always posting online, always signaling online, because that is now the culture. Okay? So that's something to understand. So we can wrap this up. All right. I'm going to go ahead and I'll actually just erase the recap. I'll leave this up there just so we can take it in a little more. Okay, so now it's important to note, right, that we don't produce data anymore. Right? We don't produce data anymore. We live inside of it. We live inside it, okay? And the pillars of modern life that we've been discussing, right? Modern society, and that is just essentially explaining how we have been reconstructed by data without most people understanding. And in fact, most people consciously choose that restructuring, not even understanding how it impacts them on all three of these levels. Okay? And so the goal of modern learning isn't to demonize technology or tell people to throw away their phones or stop using the internet, things like that. But it is to make the invisible visible. The things that we can't see, actually able for us to see and think critically about it. And I just wanted to do this so that people can interact with data and devices and interact with content and with each other intentionally rather than by default. And the only way you can do this is by being aware of this system entirely. So now that we understand how data shapes how we feel, how we connect, how we consume, the next question is, what do we do with all of this awareness, right? So now that we have all of this knowledge, how do we proceed? How do we move forward? And that is something that I'm going to be looking forward to and discussing in a future video. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. And yeah, we'll get you guys in the next one.